Well, this might be us.
Probably is.
So let's begin with prayer. And we've been closing with this prayer from Martin Luther King that comes from the Faithful Conversations folks. But they also have a prayer for the beginning. So I thought we'd go for that one, especially since it's very cool. Okay, let's pray. O great Spirit, from whom all life flows and all creation is fed, heal the brokenness among us. May your steady waters trickle into hard hearts, cracking them open to let love trickle in. From your clear waters, give us vision, a willingness to unlearn what we thought we knew, and see with clarity the truth, bringing forth a clear path toward reconciliation. Come now among us, bringing peace to our hearts and homes, that from there your divine love rushes forth, creating our world anew. Amen.
That's lovely.
Okay, I am not Donna, but I'm filling in because she's not here for some reason that I forget. So the first order of business is would like to change our order of conversations. This is our last one, but I really want to wrestle with you all about what specifically we could be doing as a result of this. And so one option might be to stop early and then think about an overview of the book and then what specifically we might do. Or Donna suggested we might even want to meet one more time the week after July 4th, which would be the 10th. And just to specifically think about now that we've been hammered over the head with this, what do we do? Any thoughts?
Well, I would be grateful for that because the race tab, we're now calling ourselves the race ministry team or racial equity ministry team, has been thinking about what we want to do in the future, and so for us to pull together and having experienced this together, I think it would be very helpful. Several of us are in that group, and I think that would be very helpful. So I encourage us to do that.
To have an extra time or to do that tonight?
Let's do it an extra time. Well, it suits me that I'm available either way. I was going to fix a nice dinner for Howard tonight. So maybe not two extra times. We are committed. What?
I was going to say we are iffy.
Right.
Yeah.
For the 10th.
Yeah, I'm also not here.
Keith Duff's installation is that afternoon at 3, and we're committed to be at that. But it might be over by 5. We may be able to get here, but that's just to say that could be
Probably wouldn't be able to stay for much of the reception.
I don't know what kind of reception they're doing. This is going to be at outdoors. It sounded like it's going to be kind of very informal.
I know, but the order of worship is kind of long, is my real point.
Good point.
Is it here?
Another time. I don't know. There are a lot of people not here tonight.
Right.
Who have been part of it. I think Mary's going to be out of town. I think she's going to be on her trip. But I don't know about the others who aren't here, whether they'll be around. It seems like having more people than tonight to be the ones to discuss where we go from here. It's just a thought.
But you're adding a night on that none of those people know about.
Right.
So you may get them or you may
Right.
not.
And we've already got half of us that are not going to be here.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
So what about this? What about if we include some of the people who the race staffs who have been meeting with us regularly in this group to come together and think about the future, and we can come up with another date. The 10th doesn't work for y'all.
Yeah, well,
I like that idea.
I like that.
I give it, expand and enhance a little bit what ministry team has been doing.
And Deborah in particular has challenged us to come up with a plan for several months. And so include her and Donna. Was my thinking about if the ministry team was going to be doing this. And so let's just expand it. And I'll check with them about dates. And
So, yeah, so would you do that? Would you kind of check with the team and then?
summer's hard because it's summer. Would we want to wait till early August or not?
Why don't you see what Donna and Deborah can do
Okay.
and
And then send out an email.
Yeah.
Information.
Why don't we have whatever kind of discussion we want to have tonight and not consider it to be closeout?
Okay.
It won't be a duplication to have other people in and talking about other ideas about where we want to go or what we want to do.
are you saying don't talk about the end of the book or don't have the
I'm
conversation?
talking about, why don't we just talk about whatever the Spirit moves us to talk about? If that means go forth or what's the analysis of the book or whatever. And plan another meeting. Another time.
Okay. Okay, in good Presbyterian fashion, we decided to pass it into the future and get a committee. So excellent. All right. So it's a success. There we go. Okay, so let's kind of jump into the last 4 chapters. And if there's anything that struck you or anything you learned historically that you didn't know before or you mislearned.
I didn't know. I've heard about the 40 acres and a mule, but I didn't know the plan was to divide up plantation land for that. I like that idea. You maybe don't need a mule these days, but I like that.
And it was just gotten rid of the whole idea by Johnson, who I think was born in North
He
Carolina,
was.
in Wake County, maybe. Yeah. Native son.
Yeah, I have been hearing about President Johnson, Andrew Johnson. I guess just as one of the presidents, I had no idea and have been learning, not just from here, but in the other things I've been reading about, what a disastrous administration that turned out to be. Just awful.
Or wonderful if you're
That
a
depends on which-
plantation, if you're the first plantation.
Right.
I was just blown away that the only reparation money given was to the slave owners in Washington, D.C., who got paid back for losing their slaves.
Yeah. And how, for me, it was another point, how far back this blaming the victim goes.
Yes.
They're set free with nothing and no way to earn anything. And then found at fault for not pulling themselves up or whatever they were supposed to do. And how that's remains today. Hear that consistently.
Yeah,
If you're poor, it's your fault you're poor.
Right.
right.
I was pretty moved by the chapter on progress because I do hear so many people saying, well, it's so much better than it used to be. It's just so much better. Look at what all we've done, what's happened to advance, and then just recognizing that there's been this parallel thing of pushback every time, but that there's this story we tell about our nation that we are, everything is equal and free and opportunistic for everybody, opportunities for everybody. Which does kind of leave the blame for the victim. You're not making it, it's your own fault. This is a great place. Anybody can do it. Look at Oprah Winfrey.
And we have a black president.
That's right.
But I remember during that campaign, I was talking with Mayor Kenford, who's a friend of Betsy's as well. And I was, trying to put into that, this was such a positive move that we were going to have a vomit. And she said, watch out. And she understood the potential backlash that we witnessed.
Yes.
But I do like the fact that he, and I don't think I had realized that he had woven into the rug in the Oval Office that quote from Martin Luther King about the arc of justice.
Well, it struck me that the author said, it's not progress if you're only getting to where you should have been to begin with.
Exactly.
But I disagree with that. Now, here's my true confession. I haven't read the chapter on progress.
I told it to him.
So that's we're operating out of one book, and we decided that we could not, both of us, read the 4 chapters out of the one book in the time that we had. And so she took 2 of the chapters, and I took 2 of the chapters, and then we briefed one another on the chapters that we didn't read. So she got the progress chapter, and I haven't read the progress chapter. But one of the things that I think, to me, strikes me about the whole book is it is relentless. I mean, it is people telling their story relentlessly. And to say, I think it would be a stronger presentation to say we have made progress. Black people eat in restaurants that we eat in. Black people sleep in hotels. Black people are in the hospitals that used to be segregated and have jobs that they used not to be able to have. And I think that's progress. It's not where it needs to be. But to take the position that no progress has been made, to me, borders on disingenuous. So I need to read the chapter and find out about the parallel tracks and everything. But it's really astonishing to me that people can say, well, there's not real progress being made.
Oh, go, you get at it.
Yeah.
I do it all the time. She didn't say no progress has been made. She said it's not true progress if you're only getting to where you should have been to begin with. Blacks never should have been relegated to the fields and not able to eat at restaurants and not able to stay in hotels or go to the hospital. So it's not progress in that way. It is progress from where we were, but it's not good enough.
The part of it that blew my mind from it was this conversation of look where we came from and look where we're going, which ignores where we are right now. So that's the strategy to avoid having to do anything in the present.
Right.
Because we've come so far and we're headed that way. So we don't have to do anything.
Right. Stay on this trajectory.
Yeah.
This book struck me as it's really for clueless white people.
It is.
All the stuff in this book is not new. It's been published elsewhere. They're just bringing it all together so it'll hit home to white people. And I heard a story. This is just a random thing. I was listening to an Audible series on the history of the British Empire. Okay. the professor who was giving the lectures was telling a story about when Ghana became independent. Ghana was the Gold Coast, and then they acquired their independence in the late 50s. And Kwame Nkrumah was the first president. And Richard Nixon was delegated by President Eisenhower to go to the ceremony. So they had this wonderful ceremony, and, you know, you can imagine. And then after it's all over, Richard Nixon claps the black man standing next to him on the shoulder and says, "How does it feel to be to feel freedom now?" And the guy says, "I don't know, I'm from Alabama." True story.
Yes, right. Yeah. Love that. So what, that was probably in the 60s when?
Late 50s.
Late 50s.
Yeah. I mean, Richard Nixon's like all the rest of us, a clueless white person. He doesn't really know what's going on, or doesn't want to know.
This morning in the commitment class, we were just getting together to catch up with each other a little bit, but several of us have been reading this and were commenting about it. And Hilda Porter said, "I have been teaching, I taught fourth grade for a number of years, and it was North Carolina history, and I've never heard some of this stuff. I did not know about the Wilmington massacre. I didn't know about some of this stuff. It's been conveniently left out so that we have been clueless. We've just been living in that myth of meritocracy and
American exception.
You know, they talk about what we can do. The last chapter, Nikole Hannah-Jones really lays it all out.
She does.
She says, okay, the answer is reparations.
Right.
And Jack and I both have played around in the legal profession. We know when there's an injury, you go to court and you get damages or just reparations. And that's what Nikole Hannah-Jones says we need to do. Now, that's kind of a radical idea, but it fits right in with our concept of justice. And I think what she means is, I've seen enough things in my life to know that if you give people a pile of money at the end of a lawsuit or an inheritance, a lot of people are totally incompetent to manage that money, and it goes through their fingers like water, and a few months later, they're back where they started. So I'm not sure she's thinking about that. She doesn't say that specifically, that everybody ought to be given a pile of money as reparations. But I think if we started looking at things to do to help the Black community, you know, pump a lot of money in schools, give a lot of money in housing aid or food aid, and especially education, scholarships, tuition, things like that. And we would run into legal problems, particularly with the current Supreme Court. They'd probably say, well, you can't treat anybody unequally.
Right.
This is reverse discrimination. I mean, you can't do that. Well, actually, you can. If somebody's been injured, you're entitled to give them damages and reparation, even though you might be treating them differently from somebody else. So I don't know. I really like that idea because I don't think we've ever really pursued the concept of reparations because it's so politically unpopular. But I think we ought to start talking about it.
Well, certainly our church, y'all may not be aware, I certainly wasn't until fairly recently, that the city has set up a scholarship program for children who go to the historically Black high schools in Greensboro. They have a scholarship to go to college. 5 scholarships are awarded in reparation for the 5 folks who were killed in Morningside Homes.
I did not know that.
Yeah, in Georgetown, they have this scholarship fund because they sold slaves at a certain point in the 18th century to keep themselves from bankruptcy. Then they established a scholarship especially for that as reparations.
And so the city has done that for, you know, and the fact that nobody much knows about it, it bothers me. But that's one of the things that we've talked about, whether we could do something similar here in honor of the founding of the slave members of our church.
Oh, that would be.
Well, it's interesting to me, reparations is one of these words like freedom and racism and everything else. And she has her own individual criteria set out for reparations, which I had never seen. And I believe it is based on an individual formula. It is not institutional. It's not scholarships for this or housing or this, that, and the other. So that's a very interesting thing for me to consider. A, it's helpful for me to see what her formula is, but B, I'm still at the bottom of a learning curve if we talk about reparations to individuals.
That's all your things, I think you're.
Well, I will in just a minute, but one of the things that really astonished me is her saying, this is what we need to do. Here are the criteria you need to have claimed to be. You need to have claimed to be African American for 10 years before the act passed. You have to have claimed your heritage. Number two, you have to be able to trace your family lineage back to a slave. Number three, we need to be prepared to give people money because the deposit of wealth is what,
It's where the gap is.
So to me, that's an astonishing sort of, here is the solution. I really like the Conyers bill, the House Bill 40, which calls upon us to study the whole concept of reparations and to come together with ideas. One of the ideas that I had about reparations was to provide a free college education to every person of African American lineage whose father, uncle, mother, or somebody fought in World War II and were not able to take
GI Bill.
the GI Bill because, number one, there were institutions like my beloved University of North Carolina that wouldn't take them in, and there was not enough HBCUs to accommodate those. So there are millions of GIs who did not get to access the GI Bill, and some of them because they went to school in Mississippi and Mississippi didn't provide high schools for anybody. They were, there are all kinds of reasons academically, but if we said to those families, those direct descendants, you get 4 years of college, we're going to cover that just like should have been done for your grandfather or your father. That appeals to me. It also appeals to me to say to African American people who couldn't get federally insured loans from 1934 to 1962 and got redlined out. We've got a program for you whereby the government will insure your loan so that you can go buy a home the same way that white people were able to do.
Well, you should have been.
Yeah.
Our ancestors should have been.
Yeah, and so I think there are a lot of things that could be part of a reparations approach to this, other than what she says is here's what we have to do. I thought that was a little bit arrogant.
Well, it's her book. She can
Yeah.
say what she wants to say.
Yeah,
A lot of people would say, well, what do you suggest we should do? Well, she gave an idea.
Except that she said this is the solution, not. what
Yeah, I was not sure. I knew I was clueless. And so when she wrote that, I said, oh, is that what it means? In fact, that is not necessarily what it means.
Right.
It's her recommendation. But I thought, oh, now I know the answer. That's,
I think
That's not
she's
it.
right in some ways that we need to establish that wealth somehow. You know, I agree with what you said about school and about housing, but sometimes sending the only male in the family to school is a big hardship, even if you don't have to pay for it. You know, because it's someone who can't be earning money right then. So I don't know, they need a foundation of wealth.
We need
Somehow.
Yes,
people
yeah.
who would be the recipients of any reparations to help us to make this decision.
you're absolutely right.
Well, I was thinking, you know,
They're the stakeholders.
maybe First Pres doesn't need to decide, but maybe you could talk with St. James or
Yeah.
other churches too about what First Pres could do.
It should not be a product of our beneficent wisdom.
Right. Right.
Learn here, let me help you.
I hope we learn that. We don't have the answers.
Right.
That's why.
But what about investments in just low income neighborhoods? It wouldn't be necessarily only African Americans, but the majority of African Americans, or I don't want to say that, but a disproportionate amount of African Americans are in low income neighborhoods, and investment in those schools and investment in those neighborhoods would help more than just the African Americans, but it certainly would.
I think you should work to dismantle mass incarceration.
Too, absolutely.
Some of these statistics here from the Poor People's Campaign about the incarceration and the incredible percentage of African Americans.
If yours didn't print out completely, there's
There's
complete ones right there. That's, it certainly made me think about how do we not just give money or not just put money into neighborhoods, but how do we accumulate wealth? How do you accumulate that?
Right.
And so how does that do? And so if we get a lot of college graduates, but we don't pay them equal to what white graduates would get, then and if they're in a low income neighborhood and we just put money in that low income neighborhood, that doesn't make them what they need. What we need to do is help finance them homes
Right.
out in suburbia,
Right.
so they can build equity in.
Right.
But leave the old neighborhood still poor and not renovated.
The poor will always be with you.
Well, the transportation
Right. That was
chapter.
striking.
that was mind-boggling too.
Very true. I thought it was especially poignant that she could pinpoint Atlanta, and this is
Yes.
why it's this way.
Yeah.
And we've probably all driven through rush hour in Atlanta. It's terrible.
Well, when we met at St. James that one time, there were people who were talking about having lived in the community. It begins with a W. That was Warnersville, that had been done away with practically because of roads coming in there and so forth, and how and then when blacks were allowed to move out and buy houses in other places and began to leave, the professional people left, and that left the people who didn't have resources still there without role models.
Right.
The role models, the teachers and the doctors and the lawyers who used to live there and have businesses there, they're no longer there.
And the resources dry up when the people move out. Move out.
Like getting food. I mean, public good.
Has anybody heard that there's a legal coming in downtown at the corner, isn't it right at the corner of Eugene and
Yeah.
right across from the,
Urban Ministry.
from the A&T, UNCG, GTCC
Yeah.
Center? Yeah,
What's coming
legal grocery store.
Good. Yeah, but I think it's gonna.
That's a question. I'm not
I
making.
think it is coming. I want to say maybe it's a year away or something. It looked like, when I heard about it, seemed like, oh, that's great. Oh, it's gonna be a while. Well, yeah, hopefully it'll be.
But I think it's more than wishful thinking.
Yes, I think it is in fact, in the works. Yes. It's been a long time that's been a.
Does anybody know the status of House Bill 40? You know, she ended that with saying that it finally got out of committee in 2021 after Conyers had died.
Right.
And do we know where that stands? Did it pass the House and is sitting in a
It's not gonna pass these days.
Senate? Yeah.
I'm waiting for them to overturn whatever amendment and restore slavery.
Really?
You can use the same criteria for rationale.
Yeah, and which brings me to want to say, when you were talking about what can we do to vote for white people.
We also need to get more people to vote.
And we get more people to vote and to register to vote.
And educate people about what the issues are and what the implications of the platforms are.
And everybody feels real squirmy about doing that here at this place. But I think it's some of our responsibility to each other, to help people to know. Right. The difference, we have plenty of people, and I don't know whether our members, but there are people who say, it doesn't really make any difference, you know, who you vote for, without really understanding what it does.
Well, there's certainly a lot of places in North Carolina where it doesn't matter.
Right. My vote is worthless where I am.
Yeah.
I vote, but
We've heard a thing, Jake Tapper was talking with Stephen Colbert, I think, about.
But he was talking to them.
Stephen Colbert,
Oh,
and it was just an interview and this was before the most recent Supreme Court stuff, but he had said, Stephen Colbert was saying, well, how, all this stuff there's, this enormous, a percentage of people who are in favor of some gun control kinds of things, and how is it? Even Republicans are, how is it that these laws just nothing changes and Jake Tapper said that's 90% of the people. It's not 90% of the voters.
Right.
And that was a shocking thing to me. It's like, oh.
and then you magnify that, it's not 90% of the voters, and then you magnify that by gerrymandering.
Absolutely.
So that the 90% of the voters clustered together elect Congress people.
That's right. That's exactly right. So, it can be really discouraging. And that may feed some of the people who are saying it doesn't matter anyway.
Yeah.
But that attitude is going to take us all on a jet trip to a place we don't want to go. I think.
Well, our faith tradition tells us that no change is going to happen in one generation.
Right.
So you got to wander in the wilderness, but you won't get there. It's going to be your sons and daughters who get to the promised land.
Yeah, and plant acres for trees that are somebody else is gonna live in the shade of.
But then most planting,
Right.
and actually doing something.
And that may be more of what we need to do rather than think big, is to think beginnings, and decide, is it going to be housing? Is it going to be education? Is it, but find some places that we can advocate, we can educate, we can start to help.
Could we decide to give first priority to African American businesses to from any action that the church is, we're buying supplies or doing repairs or?
Good idea.
That
That
can
can
be
mean a
look
lot.
at how our money is invested, what funds,
Mhm.
and make sure there's not discrimination in those funds.
They've made some pretty interesting overtures to the General Assembly regarding divestment. And I can't spout them off to you because I'm not that good at remembering, but the committee worked hard this week.
I think you said that's
GA going on right now?
Yes.
How long is it? It's been going on for about 10 days, right? Or a week and a half?
Probably, I don't know exactly when it started, but
Last Sunday was the first day, the election of the moderators.
that's right.
And so this finishes the week one of committees.
Oh, okay.
And then next week, there's a whole nother section of committees that are meeting.
And there's 3 weeks of committee work and then plenary. The plenary part is virtual, so.
Huh. So it's at least 3 weeks.
It's gonna be about 4 weeks total.
I never knew that. That's interesting.
Well, it's just this year because they've divided it into 3 different groups.
Okay.
Because they didn't want, such a large group together for a long time.
There's still been some COVID apparently.
There has.
Oh, boy. Talk about being road hard and put up wet. Woo.
The idea of using Black-owned businesses for projects, if we've got them, I think is a really big one. One of our African-American friends whose husband is a contractor says, there are not any Black contractors that are big enough to make the bids for a great big project, but you could insist that they at least use Black subcontractors as part of the, if a big company gets the job, gets the bid, that part of the workforce should be some Black-owned businesses as subcontractors. So, it was just a reminder to me that, that you've got the mandate that you've got taxpayers' money. You cannot just take a great big bid because you like the way this person looks or something, but capitalism makes it really hard.
I was wondering, in the years that we've had the race equity task force, and we've had communication with St. James and Providence and others, right? Have we ever asked them what they want us to do?
no, not to my knowledge. We've had conversations about that's what we should do. And in part, to give further explanation, in part that's because St. James has been going through a very long transition with ministry. You remember Reverend Monk left and went to PCUSA, and then they've been and so in the past 6 months they have a new minister. And so establishing that relationship is important before we come swimming in and say, oh, we want to go.
And that highlights for me one of the delicate balances here, because on one hand, we say that we need to hear from them what their needs are and what they want us to do. And then there's the other message from the Black community, is that don't come to us and ask us to educate you on what you need to do. You know what you need to do. Don't come to us for a tutorial.
I think it's a different question though. You're not asking them what to do about racism or how you can do this. You're saying, we want to do this project in reparation for the founders of our church, the builders of our church. How can we best do that so it's beneficial to you? Not, we want to help you. Not, what can we do? You know, we want to make a statement about reparations. How can we best benefit you in doing that?
And what if they come back and say, we think for reparations, we've come up with $2.6 million.
Well, you negotiate it.
And we start a fundraising campaign.
There you go.
Yeah.
You can do 2.6 in this church.
That's a curious amount that you just.
I'm just pulling something out of that. You know, if we had a fundraising drive, and the people who felt committed to this idea of reparations to St. James, and we raised $32,600. That's a lot of money. St. James might say, you've got to be kidding me. You can't wipe the slate clean with $33,600. You know, to me, it's a real.
It's deeper than money.
Yes.
It's a delicate thing.
It's complicated.
Yeah.
But we can start off by admitting our sin
Absolutely.
and asking for forgiveness.
You remember the service that
But we didn't admit the sin.
we had a lot of conversation as that service was being developed, of course, over a year, about whether what is our role? And it was not, we couldn't get to confession of sin.
Right.
We couldn't get there at that time. Maybe in this time we could, but at that time it was reconciliation. That's what we could do.
You can't fully reconcile until you admit what the issue is.
Exactly, that was what I said over and over and over.
You know, if you look at the order of worship, you confess your sins right after you're called to worship. Is the first act of worship.
And we try to do a lot of,
And I think you're right. I mean, we confessed our sin, but what everybody was squirrely about was an apology. You know, we were hearing from people, our church better not issue an apology because we haven't.
We're not the ones who did it.
that's right.
Yeah.
It wasn't Margaret Arbor.
Yeah.
That's right.
And it's the same thing with the use of the word reparations. It's such a red flag word that,
I thought one of the fascinating things was the woman who sued the federal government in 1917 and said, we want 68,073,000 some as the amount of tax that the government collected on the cotton that was sold during the period of 1862 to 1868 or what. I thought that was fabulous.
Yeah.
To say, this money, this tax stream came from that product that we produced. And then and Woodrow Wilson says, well, the government doesn't owe you any money back. Your masters owe you reparations. Don't come to us for reparations.
And I suspect St. James or whoever you talk with could come up with something just as specific. Maybe not, but they've thought about this before.
And I mean, I'm thinking too, we're educating ourselves by reading this book and other things. And what we would want to know from them is we want to develop an action plan, but we're not going to jump in without consulting or ask.
What about an education action plan? The conservatives are trying to put a lid on public schools raising anything like this,
Right.
which they call critical race theory, which is not. But I mean, this book is a classic example of what they don't like. What could we do to make sure that these restrictions on education in public schools can be lifted?
I think that's a really important thing right there.
It is.
Because maybe one of the most important things we do is advocate for a more inclusive history to be taught in our schools. That you don't have to make kids feel like it's their personal fault right now. It's important for them to know the history, however.
And the way you do that is by making certain that the right people, the people who agree with us are on the State Board of Education.
That's exactly
And the
right.
State Board of Education.
They are the ones
Are come to be who is the elected officials.
Yes. They're appointed by Phil Berger, and
More now
appointed by the House and so.
And the governor too. But
More appointed by
you have our lieutenant governor sitting right there on the State Board of Education. That's my role.
And their policies in the past 5 to 8 years, their policies have gone
Oh, it's not really
like a pendulum from one point of view to the other.
But you're right, we should speak out about it and help people to be aware of that's how those decisions get made.
And how to understand the importance back of it. It is, if I'm still clueless, if I still believe that the United States, to speak bad of the United States is somehow a sacrilege, then those people that are, I'm trying to protect our children from being taught some awful history of the United States. I mean, I have often said, I'm glad that I live in this country and that I can say that when Donald Trump was the president, I could say that I thought he was a buffoon and a horrible president and not feel like somebody was going to come take me out of my house and lock me up somewhere. That is a good thing about our country. But there's some bad things that have happened in our country, and our children, I think, need to learn that.
What about our Guilford County Board of Education? Is it under threat?
Yes, it's very definite.
Yes.
There's a conservative group of 5 who are to take back our schools with. One of them is a
But they are definitely, I think, a threat to children learning about a more broad history and a threat about learning about sexuality issues and that sort of thing. They probably helped write that Parents' Bill of Rights bill or whatever it was.
And, you know, there was a threat of a book being banned that was being taught in an AP class that Morgan Gilbert just in the past month or so. So definitely, it's not just statewide or nationally, it's, you know, it's local.
I'm just not familiar enough with the candidates.
I'll send you that list. That was in my paper.
Yes, if I were sure I'd find it out, but I am not up to speed, so
Yeah.
thank you. Thank you.
Well, you know, one other thing that I think would be productive is to figure out how to get more people than this group of reliable suspects to read this book and other books that introduce the subjects of how we got to where we are and what we need to do on the go forward. There are hundreds of people in this congregation who don't care about what we're talking about. And not only haven't learned any of the things in the book, but don't want to learn anything more than they already know. And that's, I think that's part of the task of moving the ball forward, is we have to get more people to care about what we care about.
Well, you gotta start with a shorter book. I was getting ready. I mean, who's gonna take that?
Right.
And I even wondered if there's, instead of a book, TED Talks or
Yeah, that's good.
videos that are shorter, and it'd be great if we could have some dialogue following some of those. We had some, I think we had picked up some new folks when we were doing the 30-day things a couple of summers ago, with lots of ideas, but some of it was music, some of it was reading, some of it was videos and movies and so forth. And I think people are so busy, and in some ways I feel like that's one of the principalities and powers that are pressing on us right now, is that we are busy. We are busy, you know, answering our phone, and everything is just sort of do it now, do it now, do it now. And if I were a parent of young children right now, reading for pleasure and certainly for information would probably be way down my priority list, and just kind of keeping life going. So maybe looking at ways that we could offer some discussion groups that would be around something more manageable.
Finding things that can be seen on the screen of your iPhone. That's what, you know, that's how people get their information.
You're
It's
right.
right here.
You're right.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, and if it were short enough to be something you can watch in 15 or 20 minutes and then have a conversation, you may be able to get some more. I would be interested, there's a class for young adults that meets on Sundays now that Stu and Carrie Johnston and Lisa and Tim Cook, and I think Lauren and Will Martin and some of that crowd. It would be interesting if some of them would do a series kind of like that for a while and see, or ask them if they think that would be of interest to them, just as to get it past some of us retirees.
Well, and some of you could offer to leave it with them if that were necessary. Team up with them.
And some of them were interested a couple of years ago. That we were
All those people have been engaged with us in the course of the past number of years that we've been engaged in this work.
But one of the things we're learning is you can't take your foot off the gas.
No.
It's, the analogy of being on one of those, moving sidewalks at the airport and racism is going, whether you're walking faster or not, the racism is moving on and you have to actively turn around and walk against it to make any difference, because if you can make it go faster, you can walk through if you're in a hurry, or you can just move on it, but it's going to move. Yeah. So maybe what we can do is reinvigorate some of that discussion with them.
Yeah, because COVID, knocked you off course, knocked everybody off course. So
Yes, it is.
it's time to gear up again.
If you take our group and subtract 30 years from our median age, are those people that we know as passionate about this subject as we are?
I think some of them may be. I don't know. They don't have as much time to.
Yes, it's how much time can I,
That's right. Jobs, children. I mean, their life experience is different than ours. They haven't seen the arc of history that we have. I'm just so conscious of that. I've been parachuted in to be the chair of the discipleship committee, which I'm excited about. But there's some people a little bit younger than I that have so many creative ideas about what we need to do for people who are 29 years old. And that's just like what you were saying, but the 29-year-old people aren't helping make that decision. You know what I mean?
Right.
So I'm just because all these smart 57-year-old people think they know what we need to do. Who knows?
Right. Yeah, that's why I was thinking offer to team up with them.
Yes.
Or, not just say, well, we're going to do this
Yeah, yeah.
for you.
Or, do you care about this, or, commit us to 10 at night here and think, whatever. Right.
so I hate to interject because we haven't quite figured out the exact amount of the reparations. 2.6. But we do have we do have two videos if should we desire to have other people talk for us.
Have you seen them?
I've seen other ones.
Have you seen this one?
No,
They-
no.
Well, I found the others helpful. I mean, I was.
Yeah, because I think they come from a faith standpoint. I
Okay.
think that's been important to me, that this book I've been reading with other people at my church.
Okay. Okay, they're 15 minutes long and they're two, but I think we can do one.
Okay, let's see how it goes.
Yeah. Providing,
And I presume we could watch this on our own if the.
Can we do this? I wondered that.
yes,
Can we get to?
yes, we can, because this is, you can go to YouTube. Here it is right here.
Sorry, Reverend Funches, I told you I'd forget to say this, but I'm going to start with you on that. Just that idea of that wealth gap and the history of that.
Right. This is something, that we try to talk about on a regular and consistent basis here locally, obviously, because we're saying, to echo what Dr. King talked about, you can't be 300, 400 years behind in a race and then all of a sudden expect that there to be some kind of equal footing. It's insane. And then, of course, as you continue to read and learn so much more through these stories that the 1619 Project informs us with, and other writings like How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram Kendi or Caste by Isabel Wickelson, you begin to appreciate, obviously, that there's always been this great wealth gap, and it's only getting wider, quite frankly. It's not getting smaller, it's getting wider. And I think the article in this particular piece, talk about the median wealth income for whites, 171,000 compared to median income for blacks being at 17,000. 171,000 compared to 17,000. And then, you have a new conversation. People want to know why, the BIPOC community, Black, Indigenous, people of color, why can't they get ahead, so to speak? And then we have an opportunity to rehash these old conversations. Is because you never, when we talk about faith, what it brings to bear for me is Luke chapter 19. We say, what would Jesus do? What would Zacchaeus do? Zacchaeus would say, oh my goodness, I realize my fault. I repent of my old ways. I want to restore 4 times what I stole from anybody in order to make it right. So if we were asking ourselves, what would Zacchaeus do, for instance, I think, we would be looking at some form of reparation. They never got the 40 acres and a mule. It was legislated to happen. And then when Johnson got in, all that was ripped away. And so, and then when you think about the Greenwood incidents in Tulsa, Oklahoma, there was a big story about it on the news not too long ago. But when these things happen and you take away not only the financial legacy that could be bequeathed to future generations, when that's taking away, and not only the financial legacy, but the brain wealth, when so many people are killed at one time, to see the resilience, quite frankly, of Black people, other people of color, the indigenous people, it is remarkable. And I kind of relate to the brother who wrote the article on music, the miracle of sound. Everything is somewhat of a miracle when you consider all things. It's just remarkable that we even here today talking in light of everything that's already transpired. But anyway.
Yeah, thank you. Sabria, I want you to think about this idea of the wealth gap and the impact on communities, but also tie it in with your faith. And as a person who is coming from the Muslim faith, how does this all kind of mesh for you?
Well, I think that that one of the key pieces in Islam is this distribution of wealth and charity and this helping of others. And when I say charity, I mean in whatever form that is, not just money, but in kindness and in equality. And so I think that all of that, I think that kind of hit me the most in that in the Wealth Gap article, because, we are just allowing, as a society, allowing all of this to just keep on happening. We can take steps to do this, but instead, every step that we take towards kind of managing this, we're also not wanting to put ourselves in any kind of discomfort, and it doesn't work that way.
Thank you. And Reverend Matinee Vanderwell, I would give you the same question of that idea of the wealth gap, but also where your faith can apply.
I guess as I reflected, my faith, at least, my background is of a faith that is storied. And again, so I think the importance of just telling stories and remembering stories, so that we don't just talk about an event, but about the people who were affected by that event, so that we actually kind of see this history embodied. And I would just agree with what both of my colleagues said here. Kind of what does then trying to make the stories of those who are unheard heard, so that we can
from this time forward, do things differently, not allow injustices to just sort of multiply? How do we distribute our resources in such a way that everyone is able to benefit, not just those who are at the top of the pyramid? I think that's what I would say.
And to kind of follow up on that, and I'm going to go back to you, Reverend Matinee Vanderwell, of this idea of what you're learning in these readings. How does it affirm, stretch, or challenge your own faith and also your faith tradition?
Well, my own faith in humanity is challenged for sure. Recognizing that my ancestors participated in all of this, and that in some ways, knowingly or unknowingly, I continue to participate in that. So to a certain extent, what is affirmed in my faith is this need for repentance, for change, for turning. And then what was your second half of your question? I lost my train of thought.
Oh, no, that's fine. Learning what affirms or stretches or challenges your faith tradition.
Tradition. Well, again, I think, my faith tradition, the faith tradition that I'm in right now arrived in this country in 1628. So not long after 1619, and was based originally out of New York City, where slavery was, part and parcel of the life and probably of the faith communities that were there. So to a certain extent, again, that need for repentance, acknowledgement of what we were a part of, and our need for repentance and change.
Thank you. And Sabria, the same question to you. With what you are learning, what does it affirm, stretch, or challenge your own faith and your faith tradition?
I don't think that it does. I think what it does is the need for other people to reaffirm their faith. I mean, this is what faith is. It is treating people the way that they're supposed to be, as equals. I think it's a matter of everybody ignoring that and not practicing the way that they should be. I think that all of these faiths have that underlining peace and love within them. So what you choose to do with that is what you choose to do with that. And unfortunately, none of these stories are that surprising to any of us. We know this stuff. We know this is happening because it didn't happen just then. It's happening now. People are overshadowed and people are put into communities where they cannot progress, as a whole, as a majority white community, we are still doing this. And so I don't think that challenges my faith at all. It's, like was said before me, this challenges my faith in humanity. This is something that we should know as human beings, that how to treat people and how to just the basics of humanity really is what it is. All of these stories are things that we've heard pieces of before. Maybe we got more details now, but this is stuff that we know and we see happening today still.
Thank you, Sabria. And Reverend Funchess, the same question to you. What you are learning, what does it affirm, stretch, or challenge your faith and your faith tradition?
Right. What I'm learning as we engage in these kinds of conversations and these readings is that it just affirms the need to continually engage the prophetic imagination. It inspires us with a newfangled courage, hopefully, to keep knocking, keep pushing, to keep improvising, to borrow from my brother's work when he was talking about music, the idea of improvising. And he said something about music that's born of feeling, of play, of exhaustion, and of hope. All these feelings combine in order to keep pushing us, because you can get lost in the just a mere composition of the thing, but it's the background noise that gives it its distinctive flavor. And I just believe that each of us carries the Imago Dei in his or her life. And as a result of doing so, we've each been charged to do something very distinctive in terms of making a contribution in the world. But if we're going to do anything, for instance, about the racial wealth gap, if we're going to do anything about the mistreatment of different persons and of different sexual orientations and that kind of thing in the world today, we have to muster up, something that comes from deep within. And that becomes musical in some way. Hard to define, but it's improvisation that somehow takes over and allows us to be bigger than we sometimes actually seem to be. And so the cross and the lynching tree, Jesus was somewhat one of the first lynchees. And I think that we are still seeing technical lynchings all over, and therefore it demands that we come forward and say, in light of all of this data that we're aware of, we have to put a stop to these lynchings, and thereby we embody this work in a way that demands that we do more unto our last breath.
Thank you so much. Thank you to each of our faith leaders. I am so grateful to each of you for your presence and your thoughtful conversation tonight, and has challenged each of us to think deeper on these issues. Thank you to each of you who are watching. Your willingness to listen and engage in the conversation is truly important. How will our nation and communities make progress in dismantling racism if we cannot talk candidly and then take action? A heartfelt thank you to our team of faith leaders who designed Faithful Conversations about the 1619 Project, and those who participate in Faithful Voices for Racial Justice each week. And for now, if you have not already done so, please register to vote. And if you have registered to vote, please help someone else register to vote and to go to the polls.
What were you sharing here? I was just saying that I was struck by the music improvisation being, a way to describe how we respond and what we need to do, and that music encompasses love and challenge and faith and hope, and I really appreciate those comments.
I think he was saying something about that, hoping and praying that knowing this material gives us courage, which I hadn't thought about. That's true. Courage to act.
One thought I had this afternoon was the term wealth. And it's like all these other terms that you think you know what somebody's talking about. And I'm thinking, if I am a poor white person hearing that white people have wealth, I would be very put out with that. It's true, and with an aggregate, whites have a wealth gap. Individually, we don't necessarily. There are whites here and there are whites here. So, it's just tricky to me. The whole thing is sort of set up to make it hard for us to talk about a problem when words get in the way and they do those things that jump at us, like reparations, like racism. And I think even racism as a word, people think they know what that means. And they don't understand the history that makes sense to us who've read about it and thought about it. It's still individual in some people's minds. And I think that's what I'm afraid is happening if I'm going to use the word wealth. I think it needs to be explained, and that's just hard.
This is a hoot and a holler. Betsy and I have a habit every morning of walking. We get up. Been doing that for 40 years. And she got up this morning and put on her eracism t-shirt. Black letters, white shirt. Independently, I had put on my eracism t-shirt, white letters on a black t-shirt. So we're walking in our neighborhood today as an advertisement for racism.
We were unplanned. It looked like we were
Demonstration.
Yeah.
It looks planned.
So one of our neighbors, who is a thoughtful person, stopped and said, "What is eracism about?"
Good.
You know, this is, you know, you're wearing this shirt, this declaration of an anti-racist mindset. And she said, "Does that mean that we erase all of our history about race?" And it was flabbergasting to me that the message created that kind of thought process, that you're trying to erase our history about racism. And she wasn't being snarky about it or anything, just curious about what is that.
Good for her.
Yeah.
And we said, yeah, and then walked on.
How do you erase it going forward?
It was a great opportunity.
It was a learning thing for me to say, this concept is not self-explanatory. You know?
Yeah.
Not for everybody. A lot of people, when I wear it, a lot of people will say, "I love your shirt.
Yeah.
I really like that.
Yeah,
Like your
yeah.
message." This was the first time somebody who apparently wasn't quite sure what it meant asked about it. How many other times, we don't know.
Yeah.
But it was a good opportunity because she was receptive, and her next door neighbor, who was also standing out, they were talking when we walked up. When we said, "No, not erase our history, it's teaching a more inclusive history." And he said, like, the kind we should have learned along the way. And it was like, okay, so here's a chance.
Yeah.
So, but, you know, it was an interesting thing. And along those lines, in another setting, when we were talking about things we could do, somebody else said, I believe in messages on my shirts and my hats. And she said, I have people comment about or ask questions about the shirts I'm wearing. And said, I'm very deliberate about that. And I'll wear them places, and it offers an opportunity to strike up a conversation.
I mean, there's a reason why you see logos and all kinds of things on t-shirts.
Absolutely.
It must work.
Gets into our muscle memory. Yeah. Has anybody read, I've heard it mentioned at least once here, Isabel Wilkerson's book, Cast, as in cast of, yeah.
Yes. And also the book, The Warmth of Other Signs.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to, sort of same subject, different framing, but I'd love to participate in a group reading of one of those books. It's not the same as if you try to read it by yourself. Yes.
So Dory, tell us about Cass.
Yeah, I'm not gonna do that. It's been a while, and I certainly can't speak to a book this thick.
Is it that thick?
Yeah.
But perhaps we
She
could talk
doesn't
about
write
it
little
over.
clips.
We could talk about it over supper.
There you go.
Or even, I'd love to have it as another group read, because it is about racism, but it frames it differently in terms of structure and society.
I think it was one of the book club books.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
Which I did not participate in.
I didn't either.
So I welcome a chance for this group
Well,
of
and
other people to read it.
And Oprah went on a tear about that because she ordered 500 copies and sent a copy to CEOs. She really said that this is a book that everybody in America needs to read. And so she sent copies to, yeah, all over the place.
What a remarkable person.
Yeah.
You get a look. You get a look.
But you have to read. It was some years ago, Sam Hummel brought us a copy of William Barber's book, The Third Reconstruction. And he said, I'm giving it to you, and you have to read it. And then you need to give it to somebody else who will read it. And you sign your name on this book. When you've read it, sign inside that you've read it and pass it on to somebody else. And that's cool. With that same instruction.
That's
I thought that was great. He had bought a number of copies and he was giving them to people and said, you need to read it, sign inside that you read it, and give it to somebody else and insist that they read it.
And it had a thing to come back to Sam at the end
That's
of the
right,
year.
at the end of the year.
Uh,
I had forgotten that part of it.
Yeah.
That's right.
And then I think he took signed copies of that thing, circulated to Dr. Barber, and said, here's what we've been doing.
But it was a good book, and it was not as long, but it had some of those same things of the fact that there was a reconstruction at the end of the Civil War. There was a reconstruction at the end of the 60s and 70s. They don't last. We need a third reconstruction. And even Kendi I think he was the one that cited that as that we need a third reconstruction because the last one didn't last.
Like our vaccinations, we need boosters.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, I'm gonna have to call time here. I hate to do that, but I'm obligated to officially say we're gonna end, but unofficially we don't have to. And we usually close with a prayer with Martin Luther King. Do you all have copies of that or not? I memorized it. No, I got it on my phone.
I won't be able to read that. Terry is on the website.
It is
Faithful Conversation.
faithful-voices.org.
Okay.
So is the prayer on that website?
Yes.
Oh, thank you. Faithful dash voices. Thank you.
And then you gotta do 619 project.
Wait, 1619 and then faithful
No, faithful
dash.
voices.org/1619 project.
Thank you.
faithful-voices.org/the-1619-project.
Faithful-voices.org.
You need something to look on, Ginger.
I'm sharing her, thank you, Margaret. I'll pull it in.
You have to scroll down to the very bottom.
She's
Are
not
we close
anywhere
enough?
close. She's got a blank screen.
It is not working, so go ahead, I'll listen.
All right, then let us pray. Creator of all life, when our eyes do not see the gravity of racial justice, shake us from our slumber and open our eyes. Make of all courage and wisdom, when out of fear we are frozen into inaction. Give us the spirit of bravery. When we try our best, but say the wrong things, give us a spirit of humility. Divine light, who birthed us all, when the chaos of this dies down, give us a lasting spirit of solidarity, O Lord. When it becomes easier to point fingers outwards, help us to examine our own hearts. Racism breaks your heart. Break our hearts for what breaks yours. You called us to be in relationship with one another and promised to dwell within and among us. In our community, we are many different people. We come from many different places, have many different cultures. Open our hearts that we may be bold in finding the riches of inclusion and the treasures of diversity among us. We pray in faith. Amen. Amen. All right, thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry.
Good job.
Oh, okay, and Donna, you're going to re-listen to this and take notes on all our suggestions. Thank you.
Yes.